Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's morning where we are today, and I'm not sure where you are located, so perhaps it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Gwen. I'm the Assistant Registrar, International and Recruitment, and I am very happy that you've decided to join us this morning to learn a little bit more about the programs that we offer in Architectural Studies and Visual Studies. So I'm going to get started. And we do want to take just a moment to pause and reflect. And at the University of Toronto, we always acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. And so while I know we are not all in the same place, I would encourage you also to take a moment to pause and reflect where you might be located. So for thousands of years, the lands where University of Toronto operates have been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As a brief overview of what we hope to cover in today's presentation and information session is just some general information as well as some information about what your next steps might be. And then we will open it up for a panel discussion. So we're very lucky to be joined today by both our program directors as well as some current students in the programs that we offer. And they're very happy to answer any questions that you might have. And so if you do have questions, and I hope you brought questions with you today, during the presentation, we won't be able to see the questions, but you can still enter them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will be able to answer those during the panel discussion. So at a very high level, the University of Toronto is made up of three separate campuses. And so just to make sure it's completely clear, there's the University of Toronto Mississauga campus, the University of Toronto Scarborough campus, and the University of Toronto St. George campus. And the St. George campus is located in downtown Toronto, and it is also home to where we're located at the Daniels faculty. And so this is an aerial view of the buildings that are associated with the Daniels faculty and the programs that we offer. So in the center of the screen there in the circle is the main big building at 1 Spadina Crescent. And then adjacent to that are two buildings we call them the Borden buildings. And that is also where our students take classes and have studio, etc. So the main building that we will probably talk a little bit about is the one that's located at 1 Spadina Crescent. And this is home to all Daniel students. And so students will have classes in this building. They may have labs or studios in this building. The registrar's office and student services and dean's office is also located here. There is a cafe for students to get coffee and places to get together with colleagues and get to know one another and attend classes and attend lectures and other things that are happening in this building. Across the road, there is also the North and South Borden buildings, which host many of the visual studies studio program classes, as well as some lab spaces. And so it is a space that our students will get to know as well. As we've mentioned, we have two undergraduate programs, our Architectural Studies program, as well as Visual Studies. And I just want to give a very high level overview of what students might be taking in the first year of their architectural studies program. And so many times we receive questions about what will I be studying, what will I be taking, and what will that look like? And so for the first year of the architectural studies program, it is largely required courses. And so you will be automatically enrolled in the courses that you need to take. Students do have a little bit of choice here, and they do have some elective options they have one in the first term and one in the second term as well. And what might that look like in a week? And this is very much a sample schedule. And so your classes might look a little bit different, and this does change from year to year. But just to give you an idea of what Monday to Friday might look like if you were to add in all of the required courses. And so for this student's particular schedule, without having added their elective course, it looks like in the fall term they might have Tuesday as a day that they don't have any classes. And Friday also looks like a fairly light day as well. Again, this is just a sample to give you an idea of what a week might look like in this particular program. In the visual studies program, there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of the electives. So there are required courses as well that students will be automatically enrolled in. And then they do have some elective courses that they have to choose from as well. And so this gives students a little bit of flexibility to explore some other academic options that they might be interested in. And then again, just to give you a quick idea of what that might possibly look like. And this doesn't include the elective courses. So this is the required courses and where they might be scheduled for students to be able to kind of plan out their schedule. And there are academic advisors available to help students plan this out as well. And so they don't have to know exactly what they're doing, especially in first year. You have an opportunity to explore and work with the academic advisors to figure that out. We do use a lot of language that can sometimes be a bit confusing or new to you. And so just again, at the highest level, we use the word specialist, and that refers to the number of credits that students are taking in a particular subject area. So specialist, majors, and minors are all part of the programs that we offer. And so it just simply refers to the number of credits in a particular area. And so again, at the highest level for architectural studies and visual studies, both of these programs are honors Bachelor of Arts degrees. For architectural studies, it is a specialist program. And after the second year of the program, students can choose to stay in comprehensive. They can choose design, history, and theory or technology. For the first 2 years of the program, all the students will be in that comprehensive stream. And for visual studies, they have a specialist or a major. And so students who are in the specialist stream, they can choose from studio or critical after the first year of the program. And then students who are in the major often do combine other areas as well. And so they do have a little bit more flexibility in their program to include a major in architectural studies or arts and science, or 2 minors from arts and science. And this is something students, if they're not entirely sure about, can definitely connect with academic advisors to better understand that. There are studio spaces available for students in both the Daniels Building and the Borden buildings as well. Some things to think about as you're planning ahead and thinking about what university life might look like for you. And sometimes that's deciding whether or not you would like to live in residence, if you're thinking about living off campus, or maybe you will be commuting from home to school. And so things to think about if you are thinking about living in residence, there is an application deadline of March 31st. You might want to think about whether or not you know somebody who you would want to be a roommate, or whether or not you would like that to be decided by the housing department, the costs associated with that, and of course, always making a budget for any one of these possibilities. If you're thinking about living off campus, of course, you would need to look into housing, possibility of thinking about roommates, the costs, the distance that it might be from school. So the residences that are at the University of Toronto campus are fairly close to campus. If you are thinking about living off campus, the City of Toronto can be quite large, so you would need to think about your commute to campus as well. And then if you will be commuting, you have to think about the distance from school, the commute times, the costs, and the various modes of transportation. Being in a metropolitan city, there is a lot of different ways to get around the city, but it is something you do need to think about and plan ahead for as well. For those of you thinking about residence, it is something that is guaranteed to all students coming into their first year of an undergraduate program, but there are some deadlines you need to pay attention to. And so the application deadline of March 31st is important, and then accepting your offer by the deadline that's in the offer letter is important as well. The tuition fees. In thinking about budgeting and planning for all of our Ontario residents, the tuition plus ancillary fees is around $8,000. For our students who are domestic students, but they are coming from a different province in Canada, they are a little bit higher in terms of the tuition fees. The ancillary fees will remain the same. And then for our international students, there are the international tuition fees, as well as the ancillary fees. And one more thing to budget for, which is UHIP, which is the University Health Insurance Plan. And so that's something to consider when you are putting together a budget specifically for our international students. A few other items to think about and keep in mind is that for students who are in our programs, they are often building and creating different things. And so some of the things they do have to think about is a budget for additional supplies. Now, this can really vary from student to student. It can really vary depending on the courses that students are taking as well. And so, although I put an estimate there of around $1,200 to $2,000 as a budget for a year, it really can change quite a bit. It depends on whether or not students are using supplies that perhaps they have around, or maybe they're recycling supplies, or whether or not they're purchasing supplies outright or using more expensive. So it really can depend quite a lot, but it is something that you should think about in terms of putting together your budget. For students who are thinking about purchasing a laptop or interested in knowing a little bit more about some of the software, the Daniels website has a really great link there, and I can share this with you afterwards as well, with information on what kind of laptop you might be looking for, the different software that's available both through Daniels as well as the University of Toronto. And this is something that we do tend to get a lot of questions about. And so as you're doing your research, it is good to take a look at that so you have all the information. Of course, there are scholarships, awards, and financial aid as well. And so applicants are typically automatically assessed for any merit-based scholarships, and that would go out with an offer of admission. There's also an awards profile that students can complete, as well as students can apply for financial aid through the University of Toronto. And if you are an Ontario student, you will be wanting to take a look into your OSAP, which is the Ontario Provincial Student Loans. And then for our out-of-province students, you should check with your respective province about the loans. US loans are also something that can be administered by the University of Toronto as well. So this is an opportunity to take a look into what is available to you and accessing that for your studies as well. Orientation is really important. And so there's two types of orientation. So we have academic orientation, which is completed in the summer and is typically virtual. And then social orientation, which is in person, and this is typically held in August. And this is a great opportunity for students to get to know their peers, to get involved, to learn a little bit more about the campus and the opportunities available to them. So your next steps as an offer holder, although the deadline is not right now, the first step is, of course, accepting your offer of admission, and then applying for residence by those deadlines, taking some time to understand the courses. I only provided a very high level information about courses, and so taking the time to take a look on the website and read and research and learn about that will be very helpful. Making a budget, taking a look at your finances, and seeing what you need to be aware of before you start your program. And then, of course, orientation. Both academic and social orientation are incredibly important steps as part of your beginning in the program. And a few final tips. If you have the opportunity, please do come and visit us. You can take a tour of the St. George campus. You can always come and see building tour of Daniels. We would be more than happy to take you around. And then, of course, please keep working hard. Keep those grades up so that you can clear any final conditions that might be in your offer of admission. Now, I do think it's really important that you hear from people who are in the program and much closer to the programs than I am. And so I do want to open up to a panel discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my presentation, and I'm going to ask that my colleagues join me, and we'll just take a moment to introduce ourselves. And for our audience, just get any of your questions ready, and you can put those in using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And so I will just go left to right on my screen. Gareth, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Gareth Long. I'm an assistant professor and the director of the Visual Studies program at both the undergraduate and the graduate level.
Thank you, Gareth. And Jacob?
Hi, good morning. My name's Jacob. I'm a fourth year undergraduate student in the Architectural Studies program. I'm also the Architecture and Visual Studies Student Union president. And I've been a mentor, I've been an orientation leader, I've lived in Chestnut residence. I'm really excited to speak about my experiences. So thank you for coming.
And Peter?
Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Seeley, and I am the director of the Architectural Studies program here at Daniels.
And last but not least, Alessandra.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alessandra. I'm in my fourth year of undergrad, and I am specializing in architectural studies and visual studies. But I'm very excited for this panel.
Thank you so much. So we had a number of questions that came in before today, and so we will do our best to get through all of the questions that have come in. So one of the first questions that we have is about how the curriculum is structured in our programs. And so the question is whether or not it's a lot of theory or if there's a lot of studio time, what does that look like? And I know we have two programs here. So I'll ask maybe both of our program directors to comment a little bit on that, starting with Gareth.
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. It's both. We definitely do put students into a lot of studio courses where they are testing their ideas, they're making work, they're critiquing their work with their peers. So there's a certain kind of research that happens through making. But we're also pairing that with readings and discussions and seminar because we need to know the context in which we're working. We need to know the dialogues that our work is encountering and is participating in. And so I think unlike, speaking specifically from visual studies, unlike how a lot of art schools used to be, like in the 1950s and even up into like the 70s, like the sort of what we would call the Beaux-Arts tradition, where everyone's only just sitting in front of their easels and just painting and just talking about drawing. We're doing this now where we're making, but in the context of that our work is engaging with publics throughout the world, and that contemporary artwork is engaging with the contemporary ideas of today. It's dealing with the politics, it's dealing with the theory, it's dealing with questions of representation. Like, how do we want to represent ourselves in this medium and in this discourse? And so, to be able to understand where our studio work is positioned, we need to have a pretty good understanding of the sort of intellectual theoretical ecology that we're in and that we're making in. And so, our courses ask you to do both, to make and to think about how and why you're making, and then how publics will be bringing their own ideas to your work. So we have to understand the world of ideas that your publics are also dealing with. So it's a nice balance of both, I'd say.
Thank you, Gareth. I think the very best thing about the architectural studies program and the real strength of our architectural studies students is their ability and the way they develop and the way they just grow magnificently into different ways of thinking and working. So the slide that Gwen showed of the curriculum, of the courses you'll take, it's a real balance, it's a real mix between technology courses. We want to teach you how to use different computer software that are used to design buildings. We want you to learn how to use our laser cutters and our 3D printers, and eventually in more advanced courses, how to use, we have this fantastic robot arm in our workshop that can be used for digital fabrication. Each term, or most terms, you'll also have a design studio course, focusing more on the techniques of how to design a building. And working, often they're taught by local architects and gaining confidence at designing. At the same point, there will be other courses, sometimes taught by me, more to do with the history of technology or to do with the history of art and architecture. What we're doing is we're really, really, really trying very hard to make you comfortable and to make you strong at a whole bunch of different ways of working. We're preparing you for future studies and careers in architecture, landscape architecture, urban design, but we're also developing your capabilities to go into the tech industry or to go to medical school or to go to law school or to go in all sorts of different directions. And as Gareth said, we really put a lot of effort into developing that mix of ways of working.
Thank you. So this next question is actually for both of our students. And the question is, what does a typical week look like? And I know that probably changes quite a bit from years 1 to 4. So maybe trying to think back to what your first year might have looked like and maybe a little bit how it might be different as you move through the program. And maybe I'll start with Jacob.
Ooh, okay, typical week in first year. I would say in my first year, I didn't have class on Tuesdays. So that meant that me and all my peers would come to school. We would get a coffee at Cafe 059, which is our coffee that's run by volunteers. Some of us would volunteer in that cafe. That was our day when we would meet with professors. Most days we have class about half of the day, but the school is very alive. There's many people here, many people coming in and out. Um, yeah, I would say we spent half the day in class, half the day out of class. Majority of our time is spent inside this building, socializing, also doing our work. Yeah.
Um, Now, I guess reflecting back on first year, I feel like first year you have four mandatory courses that you have to take. Um, in architectural studies, I transitioned to a specialist in my third year, so I'm not entirely sure how a first year visual studies student's day would be, but you have four main courses, and then you're able to choose an elective, one per semester. So I feel like in first year, it's a little bit easier to navigate Course Finder and Acorn, which is the kind of like the way the university organizes courses and where you're able to select courses and enroll in courses. So I feel like it was more pre-planned, and then later on, you're able to choose different courses that you would like, and I guess like cater your degree more to what you want to study. So I feel like first year is a lot more general, second year is still a lot more general, and then in third year it becomes more specialized. And yeah.
Thank you both. And Jacob, you mentioned meeting with professors on Tuesdays on your day off. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to meet with professors for the first time? Because I know for many students that can seem very intimidating to connect with your professors, especially in first year.
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I think after almost every first year lecture, there's a lineup of about like 20 students waiting to speak to the professor. For some reason, students are like super eager to speak to their professors, which is super exciting. But the culture of our school is that the professors are sitting in the commons, drinking coffee next to the table where the students are talking about the course that's taught by the professor, your senior professor, walking to your other classes. The school's pretty small, even though we're in this beautiful building. So you're regularly running into your professors, seeing them. And I also think just the nature of our school and the fact that the program director is also teaching potentially a first year course, and that your professor from one course might be in a review in a completely other course of yours. You're regularly running into the same faculty. So it's almost impossible to get away from them in many ways, and you're constantly saying hi to them, which is exciting.
Thank you so much, Jacob. And for our audience, just a quick reminder, if you do have questions that you would like us to answer live, just go ahead and use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer your questions today. Garrett, this is a question for you. In the Visual Studies program, is there opportunities to collaborate with students in other programs at the university?
Absolutely. It depends on what flavor of collaboration you're talking about. Obviously, when you're collaborating for an assignment that you're submitting for evaluation, we have to figure out how we attribute authorship, excuse me, and figure that out just for grading purposes. But one of the things about all of Daniel's, and especially in visual studies, is that we not just encourage students to take courses outside of Daniels and outside of visual studies, but it's kind of mandatory. And so when you then go take a course in English literature or evolutionary biology or criminology, we don't want you to just take a course, but we want you to take the stuff you're learning from that course and bring it into your visual studies studio assignments. And that can mean collaborating with students who have knowledge in those fields, collaborating with professors who have knowledge in those fields, bringing that kind of interdisciplinary thinking to your studio practice. And so we've had students work with students in, let's say, the drama department to do like stuff that's kind of closer to performance arts or kind of performancey stuff. We've had students work with people in the biology department to do weird, like working with mycelia and like mushroom spores to make new artworks. So absolutely, not just is it possible, it's really encouraged because I mean these days contemporary art it's kind of flirting with every field that is out there. It's kind of collaborating with, borrowing ideas from, kind of stealing ideas from sometimes, all these different fields and bringing them to bear on a contemporary art practice. So we're at one of the top research institutions in the world. When you're taking these courses outside of visual studies or outside of architecture, you're not just studying with some random professor. You're studying with a professor who is at the top of their game in the research world. So the stuff that you're learning about is field leading. It's so rigorous, and it's impossible to not have it influence you, how you think about the world and how you think about your own making. So not only is collaboration possible, gosh, it's like if we can encourage it, we absolutely will.
Thank you. Peter, this question is for you. When do students in architectural studies start to create or build things?
From the first day. So we in your first term, so we're talking fall. In fact, the people you're listening to this panel today, this is what you'll be doing in September. In ARC 100, which is called Drawing and Representation 1, you will pick a space in the city because we want you to get to know Toronto, especially a cafe or a restaurant or a shop. And you'll start making drawings of that cafe or restaurant or shop. So we're using this as a way to teach you certain techniques of how architects make drawings, to teach you certain computer software that architects use. But you're also making these really beautiful images, and you're becoming more comfortable expressing yourself, making these drawings at the same time that you're learning about the city of Toronto. And then in your studio course in the winter, so something you'll start basically 11 months from now, called JAV 101, we want students to work designing things at different scales. And both architectural studies and visual studies students take this course. So the students actually start by making out of paper what we call a wearable, which actually means a piece of clothing. So you're kind of designing a piece of clothing and testing it out using paper. And then later in this course, you'll design a small pavilion or a small building, and you'll be making models of that. And I think you'll find in all your different courses that you'll be doing things because we really believe that the way you learn about art and the way you learn about architecture is by thinking, by reflecting, but it's also by doing and getting things hands-on right away.
Thank you, Peter. So this question is for both of our students. In creating work and walking around the building, I see students presenting their work a lot. And I can understand that that might be intimidating to do the first few times, maybe the first several times. So I want to ask you about your experiences with creating your work and also presenting that work to your peers, to your colleagues, to your professors, and what that experience was like for you. And I'll start with Alessandra.
Yes, I feel like the critique system in both architecture and visual studies, it's pretty intimidating. And I remember my first few critiques were I was nervous and I was a little bit scared to do public speaking like that, because you're ultimately just explaining what you did and almost defending your work in some way. So I feel like that can be intimidating, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Um, and it's always important to have a narrative with your work and just be passionate about what you're presenting. But it's definitely normal to feel nervous. But in my experience, the more that I've done it, the more I've been able to calm down and be able to feel confident presenting. But it's definitely a muscle that you have to practice.
To steal your words, I'm still exercising that muscle. I still get very nervous when I present my own work, and I think that's part of the beauty of this form of education is just this constant, almost like a constant discomfort, but also growth through discomfort. I think it's quite beautiful. I would say I've gotten better at public speaking since my first year and gotten a little bit more comfortable, but still, it is something that is nerve-wracking, and I think that's very natural and very human. But I do think it's preparing us for our next steps, whatever that be. Public speaking is extremely important to any field.
Thank you both. Along the same vein of student experience, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience in getting to campus and navigating campus for the first time. And I know, Jacob, you lived in residence, and Alessandra, I think you commute to campus. And so maybe talking a little bit about what it was like commuting to a large campus and also living on campus and how you navigated that in your first year. And was it overwhelming? Was it easy to figure out? What was your experience? And I'll start with Alessandra.
Yes. So I feel like commuting is different for everyone. I have some friends that are in the like I want to say like 30 minutes away from campus up to 2 hours. So it can really range. It definitely teaches you time management and self-organization, which I think is a great skill to have. But my TTC commute was a subway line, and then I took the 510 Spadina streetcar right to Daniels every morning, which took about 40 minutes. Um, it's not too bad. I know some people will complain about it, but it's honestly not terrible. Um, I sometimes would even do some readings during my commute, which would make it almost feel like I'm multitasking, which was pretty great. But I feel like, yeah, it's different for everyone, but it's not too bad. And it does teach you time management, which I think is a good thing. Um,
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I lived in Chestnut Residence, which it was the residence where majority of architecture students were placed, as well as engineering students. Now I believe the architecture students have the option to live in a different residence, which is closer by, which is I believe it's called the Oak Residence. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's a new building that just went up, but when I think back to first year, I remember walking with about 20 students almost every day to all my larger lectures. So Chestnut Residence is by Yonge and Dundas, but sometimes our lectures were about like a 40-minute walk. Um, they could be like on the complete other side of campus. So that was really fun, just walking all together. But daily commutes to and back from Daniels were about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And they were regularly done with a large group of people. And it was really nice to walk home, especially later at night with other people.
If I can jump in, I think one thing that's fantastic with visual studies and architectural studies, and it's where Gwen started her presentation this morning, is by noting our buildings. It means that in this big campus, and actually both Jacob and Alessandra talked about it as well, in this big campus, which on the one hand you can navigate with your telephone pretty well, but it is big. There are these buildings where you know you're going to find your friends and your professors and your colleagues, and they when you walk into our buildings, they really feel like they belong to our students because they do. And I think that's a really special thing that we have.
Thank you for adding that, Peter. And Jacob, yes, you're right. There is a new residence closer by called Oak House, and it's brand new. It just opened this past year, and it is also for architectural studies students and visual studies students. And it is a little bit closer than Chestnut. It's maybe a 5-minute walk. And so there's a number of different choices for students when looking into residence. And so definitely, if you're thinking about living in residence, take a look at the website and see what your options are, because there are a few of them. So we do have a question for our students that just came in. How do you balance schoolwork and free time? And was that an overwhelming or smooth transition from high school? And I know that is probably different for both of you, as to what that experience was like. So maybe I'll ask Alessandra first.
Um, yeah, I feel like it's really important to balance the stresses of school with extracurriculars and activities that you can do outside of academia. Um, I feel like the agenda system is the classic example of organizing and budgeting your time. But what I would do a lot is like I would have these breaks in between classes during my lunch period, and they're normally around 2 hours. I feel like that's like it's pretty common amongst my peers and I, and we would always go to Kensington and get lunch. Or there's so many different clubs that U of T has to offer that are within the faculty and then outside of the faculty that you can do that is like a nice break, but you're also able to network with people and meet people within within the Daniels community, but also the U of T community as a whole. Um, but I feel like, yeah, it was a bit of a transition for me in my first year. Like I remember walking into Daniels pretty overwhelmed with everything, and there was definitely an adjustment period that everyone goes through. But you eventually pick up and you get into the groove of things, and then all of a sudden you're in fourth year. But I feel like it does get stressful, but there's always support available. Um, and you just have to take a deep breath. But I feel like yeah, you'll once you get into the groove of things, you'll definitely be able to navigate like your time and everything. But yeah.
I would say, of course, it was overwhelming. It's a big transition in your life, but you're making this transition with many, many, many people. So I hope that can calm you down a bit. And as well, in terms of this discussion around free time, I would say it's a completely different structure than in high school when you in school, that was your school time, and then you would go hang out with friends out of school. I'd say, for example, like me and Ali, we're good friends. We're in many courses together, and we spend a lot of our time, our social time, still at school, just but it's social. It's not necessarily school related time. It might be grabbing a coffee. It might be talking about schoolwork. It might be just sitting down in school space, just being actively in our building. But doesn't necessarily mean that we're engaging with schoolwork. So I think that's another aspect of Daniels, which I
Thank you. This question is
Okay.
actually for
Oh,
all of our panelists, but I want to kind of frame it a little bit. So if you can imagine that you are thinking about going into architectural studies or visual studies, and you are in high school and you're going to university for the first time, how might you recommend somebody prepare? So thinking a little bit along the lines of our students, it's mentioning that yes, it can be a bit overwhelming. And so how can one prepare in the months leading up to starting a program? And I'm going to start with our professors on this one because they may have a different perspective, and then ask our students to weigh in. So maybe I'll start with Gareth.
okay, thank you. How to prepare? Um, Again, I think this is going to be different for each student, in terms of knowing yourself and knowing what kind of preparation you might need for this new context in which you're working. For some, that might be, as Alessandra kind of mentioned, getting a handle on time management. Unlike high school, there's a lot of self-direction in university. So the professors are not necessarily hounding you all the time to get things in or checking on deadlines. There's a lot of self-accountability. And so sort of getting your handle around your own time management, getting a handle around your own needs and how you might work, knowing how long it might take you to read something. There's a lot of reading, getting used to doing a lot of reading. And I think even just that last question that was just asked is really important here, is figuring out how to manage all the academic requirements while also making sure you can have some fun. I might be a bit romantic, but university is also about like figuring out who you are and how you navigate the world and developing as humans, not just developing as academics. And so that permission to also go out and have fun and go dancing or do something like that is really important while also doing your schoolwork. So figuring out how you can balance those things. I don't think anybody needs to do any like pre-studying. You don't need to go learn software now. You'll learn that when you're here. And you might learn it in a way that is not as helpful. So I would just take it easy, figure out what you need in terms of your time management, and then just come in with like enthusiasm and a really open mind. And as Jacob pointed out earlier, knowing that you are not entering into this alone, everyone is entering into this together with the same amount of intimidation, the same amount of feeling a little bit lost, and also being exhilarated and thrilled and having butterflies in your stomach before a critique or review. It happens. And so you're not doing that alone. So just keeping this open mind and being open to those people around you who are going through this together, and sitting down and having a coffee, and not I don't know, I always say to some of my students, like, there's not really enough time to be shy, because if you're shy, you lose out on these amazing conversations and these amazing opportunities to sit and pick the brain of your colleagues, pick the brain of your professors, and just, have this openness. So whatever you can do to harness yourself for an openness and enthusiasm, as well as understanding your own time management needs, that's what I would suggest.
Everything Gareth has said is absolutely correct. I'll add a couple of practical suggestions, but I also I really want to echo the idea that our courses are set up for people to come in with all kinds of different knowledge and abilities and comfort with, we know that some of you have been doing coding and gaming on computers for 10 years, and for others that's totally new, and it's fine for both. And some of you are really comfortable painting and sketching, and other people it's new. So I want to emphasize that the courses are meant to start from the beginning. One piece of advice I have, because one of the things you do a lot here at Daniels is you read about art and architecture, you write about art and architecture. So one thing that I think would just be fun is, in wherever you're living in the world, whatever city, whatever place, read a bit of a book, maybe that's set in your city or that talks about the place where you're from, and maybe write. And writing can mean text messages, writing can mean an Instagram post, writing can mean sending a postcard or jotting down ideas in a sketchbook. But what I'm trying to say is you'll actually realize that you're already pretty comfortable having opinions about art and architecture. So go to a museum and explain in just a few words, again, like written down on your phone, why you love a particular painting, or why you're actually kind of bored by something. And similarly, write a few sentences about your favorite street in the world, or about why you can't wait to get out of your high school or something. So but I want to stress, it's just the everyday communication you have in texting with your friend is actually pretty valid as a kind of criticism. I know some people worry about computers and software, and so Gareth's right about just don't worry about it. But we definitely have resources on our website, kind of if you're wondering what computer to buy. You can write, and we won't tell you like exactly this one, but you can certainly write and ask questions about things like that. If you're really a bit anxious about something, the whole of YouTube is full of tutorials on using different software, and I don't want you to learn that certain software. But if you're just wondering what architects use, then we can direct you and you could watch 15 minutes of video and all of a sudden feel a bit more comfortable with what you might be learning in September.
Thank you. And maybe I'll change the question slightly for our students is there anything you did to prepare, or maybe anything you wish you had done to prepare, or whether or not you did nothing to prepare and that worked out completely fine for you, because it's totally different for every student what their experience is. And I'll ask Jacob first.
Okay. Um, I would say I walked around the downtown of Toronto, just thinking about the profession I was about to embark in, or the study I was about to embark in, looking at different buildings, walking different streets, seeing all different types of people, seeing the sort of city context that I was about to work in. And I think that's significant, either if you're from Toronto or you're from a different country, coming to Toronto a little bit ahead of time, ahead of your studies, maybe a week before, and just getting used to the city, seeing its landscape, seeing its people. Super interesting, especially because the majority of our projects are set in the context of Toronto, which is a super interesting, evolving city.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of that, I highly recommend what Jacob suggested. But I also feel like, also piggybacking off what Gareth and Peter suggested, undergrad is such a rare moment in your life where you're just allowed to experiment without having like anything figured out. And I feel like the structure of the community at Daniels is supporting that kind of exploration. And I feel like U of T does have a lot to offer. You just have to take the time and look. Like, I highly recommend looking at different websites. Course Finder was a really valuable source that I had looking at different courses that were offered in and out of the faculty. There's like an entire website about clubs and different opportunities. So I feel like familiarizing yourself not only with like the physical campus, but also the online resources that really can shape the trajectory of your undergrad degree.
Thank you, everyone. That was some very helpful information and feedback. We talk a little bit about courses that are in the programs that we offer, and sometimes we use terminology that can be a bit confusing, or we use a short form for a description of what the course is. So talking to our current students, Jacob and Alessandra, is there any one course, doesn't have to be one, but if you could choose one course that you've taken so far that was really impactful for you, or was like a favorite course, and what about it made it a good course for you? Was it like the assignments that you did? Was it the content? Was it the professor? Was it your peers? What about it made it like a favorite, or one that you might think back on in 20 years and still remember that it was a good course? I'll ask Alessandra first.
That is such a tough question because they were all pretty great. 'Cause they all really taught me a lot and really shaped the way that I think. Um, but maybe I think in my third year, when my courses were more specialized, I feel like that's when I started to really hone in on what I was excited about learning. I took one third year landscape studio. Jacob was actually a classmate of mine in that. It was really great course. I feel like it really shaped me and the way that I approach design in landscape architecture. And I just felt like I learned so much about different softwares, how to approach projects, how to present my work, and it really shaped um, like the way I think. But also in visual studies was actually a course I took with Gareth. It was public art interventions. I really loved that course because it was kind of this blend between architecture and visual studies, which was like a research project about the Rouge National Park. And I feel like doing that kind of research in the university is pretty exciting because you're able to research on a real thing and then possibly propose a real thing and experiment and learn in that way. And I feel like that was really exciting because it felt very real. Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna also choose that landscape studio that I took with Ali. It was called ARC 362, I believe. And it was taught by Professor, 363, my bad. And it was taught by Professor Bernaz Asadi. And pretty much the way our third year studios work is that they are a 3 hour course. They're 3 hours of class twice a week. So I had it on Mondays and Thursdays. So my entire week was pretty much about this course. And it was about prepping the work I was going to present for Monday and then prepping the work I was going to present for Thursday. Um, and the way this professor ran the course was that it was really a marathon, constant marathon, a slow sprint. But we had to show up every single week for every single class with printed work on the wall. And together with the professor, she would mark up our drawings in a very traditional way and speak to us about what we were doing, the act of drawing, what we were drawing, the landscape processes specifically that we were trying to draw, talk about storytelling. And I think what I really appreciated about that course was seeing this professor have such a close engagement with our work, so much passion associated with our work, and like just so much dedication. I'm a very anxious student. I need to show up to class very ahead of time to just mentally prepare for the class. I would show up. The class was at 9 o'clock. I would show up at 8:30 just to get regulated. And it was like her thing. She was always there at like 8:45. It was just me and her. She would say, "Okay, Jacob, we're gonna start." And we would talk for about 45 minutes about my drawing that I had just drawn. And every single class, I was just shocked. I was like, how does this professor care so much about my little speckle that I've been drawing? It was so that was really that course really showed me how much a professor can be dedicated to your work and your practice and inspiring you for the future.
Thank you both for sharing those experiences. So I have a question that's actually quite broad, and I will ask it also to all of our panelists. And the question is really just why? Like, why visual studies at Daniels? Why architectural studies at Daniels? And I know that the information that you share is going to be a little bit different for everybody. And for our audience, this is a question you also have to kind of ask yourself about what you want to do and why you would want to come here. And so hopefully we can share a little bit with you about our programs that might help impact that decision for you. So I'll start with Gareth. Why visual studies at the University of Toronto?
Well, I think that's kind of two different questions. One, why visual studies, and then why visual studies at U of T. Um, I'll start with the second one, why visual studies at U of T, which is, as I mentioned earlier, we are one of the premier research universities in the world. So we are looking at the practice and of art, of making art, curating art, writing about art. We're doing that in the context of one of the best research institutions. So we're looking at art making as a kind of research. We're looking at curatorial work as a kind of research that is equivalent to the kind of research you would traditionally see in STEM or in sciences. Like, it is research, and we're thinking about it in this very experiential way. So we are not just making, but we're making in a context of research. We're making with this kind of dedication to critical practices. And we are working with a faculty, like the visual studies faculty, just like in the architecture and the rest of U of T, are some of the field leading artists and scholars in the world. We have people who are about to be in the Whitney Biennial. We have artists who are in collections all over the world. I've got work like at the MoMA, for example, right? Like, we are actual artists who are doing actual things in the world. You're not just studying with, local artisans who are amazing and can give you a lot, but we're dealing with people who are in that world. So it is fundamentally kind of experiential learning. And then the second part of that, like, why visual studies? Well, visual studies is like the fancy name for making art, but you might be asking, why make art now? You might be asking, like, well, what kind of jobs can I get with art? Well, guess what? There's a ton of jobs, but we're also in this moment in the world where every field is looking for people who can think creatively. every field is looking for people who can solve things with a new approach to thinking through problems. I just ran into a visual studies graduate from a few years ago who's now using his creative thinking in wealth management. Right. So he is talking to people who have way more money than all of us in terms of how to invest their money to make more money for themselves. But he talked to me about how he got hired partly because of the kinds of thinking that he can bring to this that is not just the kind of thinking that, let's say, AI would do for wealth management. Right. So there's this fundamental dedication to thinking through the world in a different way. And if you look at, we are in this crisis of the image right now, where AI is making us have to question everything we look at, where we've had this, this sort of all of the sort of politics that we're seeing play out on these world stages. Well, what do we do with these images that we're being fed? How do we read these images and how do we use these images to make us understand the world? So we're teaching a kind of visual literacy, a political literacy, and a sort of conceptual literacy that helps us figure out how to be humans in the world and how to move forward and hopefully instigate change in these things. So I think this question of why study art now and why study visual studies here is because you get to study this stuff that is going to help you fundamentally change how you operate in the world. And you're going to be doing that with some of the best people who are already thinking this way in the world. Is that a good answer?
Great answer. Thank you, Gareth. Peter, how about you?
I think people who come to architectural studies have an interest in architecture, in cities. I'm really happy that Jacob and Alessandra both talked about a landscape course. In particular, the Daniels faculty offers the combination of architectural studies and visual studies, meaning that your education is enriched as an architecture student by taking art courses and vice versa. I think one thing that's really, really special about what we do at the Daniels faculty is we give you an excellent education in architectural studies with design studios, with technology courses, with history and theory courses, with courses on how buildings are put together and the different kind of mechanical systems in buildings. But we also allow you to prepare for all sorts of different opportunities. Because I know some of you, as Gareth also mentioned, some of you, and I think this would be very normal, this is how I felt, want to be an architect but aren't quite sure exactly what a career in architecture would look like. Some of you have these kind of overlapping interests, both in the sciences and in arts. And architectural studies is a great way to develop those. So you can be doing your architectural studies education and also taking physics and calculus courses. Or you can be doing your architectural studies education and also taking political science courses or language courses or economics courses. In other words, you don't have to absolutely decide what you're going to be doing when you're 28 years old. You can be confident that as you go through the next few years, we're going to be preparing you pretty well, keeping the door open, really pushing you to become a person who's going to be a very strong medical school or law school or business school candidate. At the same time, our graduates, you will find a ton of our graduates in our Masters of Architecture and Masters of Landscape Architecture programs. And if you go around the world or simply follow some of these people on Instagram, you'll see the way that the architectural studies program at Daniels really prepares you to study at any of the world's leading architecture schools.
Thank you, Peter. For our students, I saw you nodding, so I assume you co-sign a lot of what was shared previously. Is there anything you wanted to add additionally as to why you made the decision to study in the program that you're in at the University of Toronto? I'll start with Alessandra.
Yeah, I really feel like the way that Daniels is structured is very open. So you're really able to cater and choose the way you want to structure your degree and really find out what you're passionate and interested in. Like I chose to pursue a specialist in architectural studies and visual studies, but then some of my friends are only pursuing architecture visual studies. So my other friends are doing architecture and urban studies or architecture and math and environmental studies. So it's like an array of different disciplines and professions. And I feel like being exposed to that, even like in such a learning environment is really amazing. And even like the network that we have here, since Daniels is such a small, tight-knit faculty, you're really able to take advantage of um, all the really great resources and support.
Even in the title of my description, it's architectural studies student, but what we're missing is the Bachelor's of Arts in Architectural Studies. And I think for me, that was a very significant part of choosing Daniels. I've taken courses in visual studies, urban studies, landscape, language courses, religion courses, technology courses, and architecture. Um, and while architecture is a field I will be pursuing in the future, hopefully in a master's of architecture, I think this background and this truly interdisciplinary program is really what prepares me to step into the proper field of architecture and also um, just be rest assured that like I'm choosing the right field in the future. And I think that's something that's really beautiful about an undergraduate education is just this idea of exploring all different types of things that you like, things that you don't like, um, and really just testing out the waters before you dive deeper into your education or deeper into practice or deeper.
Thank you so much. So we are at the end of our time together. And so I want to thank our attendees for sending in their questions. And if you do have any additional questions, you absolutely can follow up by email, futurestudents@daniels@utoronto.ca. We'd be happy to respond to your questions there. I do want to take a moment to thank especially our students for joining us this morning. It's early in the morning for us here in Toronto, and there are students who are very busy. So I very much appreciate the time and energy and everything that you shared with our prospective students to hopefully help them make some decisions about their future. And to our program directors, thank you also for joining us early in the morning. We thank you, everybody. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you here at Daniels in September. Have a good day, everybody.